Dr. AMY RECTOR, thanks so much for coming on to Evolution Soup, all the way from your office in Virginia Commonwealth University, USA. You are a paleoanthropologist and professor of anthropology at VCU, focusing on early human evolution in Eastern and Southern Africa. You've recently been involved in the discovery of a new species of human ancestor in Ethiopia, challenging the traditional linear view of human evolution. Welcome to the show, Amy. Well, it's all probably been a bit crazy for you and your colleagues since this amazing discovery has been announced, what with everyone wanting to know more about these findings. But I'm sure you must be enjoying all this interest.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be here to talk about our new research because it is really exciting. And so one of the great things about being in paleoanthropology and studying our ancestors is that we get to help everyone understand a little bit more about what it means to be human and what it means to study our earliest lineages and our earliest evolution. And so it is really exciting both to have the science out, but then also to talk with everyone. So to have interviews like this, to be able to go to Ethiopia and have a press conference and to get emails every day, hey, can you tell us a little bit more about this? It's incredibly exciting both to have the science come out, but then also to have an opportunity to share the excitement about the science, about the joy of discovery, and just to continue to get to tell this story. You are right. We talked a little bit about this before. You are right that it gets a little overwhelming sometimes for especially the lead authors to get so many kind of pings from different journalists and different areas. And yet that's part of this, is that that's kind of the responsibility of doing some of this really exciting science, is making sure that we spend just as much time not just talking to the academic community, but to talking to popular press and other types of venues where more people have access to that science and more people have access to this story that ultimately is about their history and what it means to be human.
Before we talk about your work and these new findings in Ethiopia, let's just hear a little bit about your background. Amy, where did you grow up, and what were the interests and fascinations that put you on the road to where you are now?
This is a great question, and I really appreciate it because I am one of those people who I had this wild dream when I was a kid that I wanted to go to Africa and I wanted to dig up fossils and I wanted to understand more about what it means to be human. And thus, I am one of these lucky people who gets to do exactly what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And so I actually grew up here in Richmond, Virginia, where Virginia Commonwealth University is. And when I was a kid, after school programs were sometimes at this place called the Math Science Center. And it was this great opportunity for kids to just go and be involved in after school programs and all kinds of programs that had to do with science. And they had some really amazing books there. And I remember as elementary school, middle school, reading books about human evolution and reading books kind of imagining what it was like to be alive in the Pleistocene and the Pliocene. And I was just so hooked. I was hooked both by the science and by the story that we can tell with the science and how important that story is. And so, honestly, I wanted to be a paleoanthropologist since I knew that was a thing. And so my whole kind of trajectory was then, how do I get there? And so I ended up at the University of Virginia when I was an undergrad, which is a fantastic school, but not a whole lot of human evolution studies. And it turned out there was a professor there named Jeffrey Hampman who this was kind of a side love for him, and he taught one human evolution class, and then he became the advisor for anybody who wanted to do human evolutionary studies. And so I was lucky enough to find him early on, and he then guided me, and he said, you have to do a field school when you're an undergrad. Here are some good opportunities. And I applied to all the ones that were available at the time. And I ended up going on a field school my junior year with someone named Dr. Kay Reed at Arizona State University. And she was brand new there. And she was running a site in Ethiopia. And she was also running a site in South Africa. And so I got to go with her to South Africa and got to know her. And I said, Dr. Reed, I am very interested in the way that you study human evolution, which is not just the hominins themselves or the ancestors themselves, but what did the environment look like? What did the evolutionary history of these lineages mean in terms of an environmental context, or what were their adaptations? What basically shaped human evolution from a contextual perspective? And I just said, man, I'm really interested in what you do. How do you think I might go about studying it the way that you study human evolution the way that you study human evolution? And she said, well, one opportunity is you might come to Arizona State and study with me. And so once again, I feel very lucky in my whole kind of linear, or my own lineage here, that I ended up being able to go to Arizona State and study with her, where I learned exactly what I always wanted to learn and got involved in the research that I always wanted to do. And so she had launched the Ledi-Geraru research project. It had a different name back then in the early 2000s. And so as a little tiny baby graduate student, I got to go for the first time. First, I went to Hadar and got to really see what it was like to do evolutionary research and look for fossils on the ground in Ethiopia. And then once she and Dr. Ramon Arrowsmith and Dr. Charlie Lockwood, once they kind of had really gotten their project up and going, I was able to go as a grad student. And at that point, we were really looking and looking and looking, trying to find the spaces where the fossils were, and spent a lot of time on the ground getting to know just the landscape. So what did the landscape even look like? How was it similar? How is it different to all the other sites in the area? And what were the opportunities there? And so I got to be involved early on, and then I kind of wasn't as involved when I was finishing my dissertation research, which focused more on Southern Africa. And then once I was kind of employed here at VCU, and again, that was kind of, it felt really lucky. There were job openings just as I was finishing my dissertation in 2010. Again, I'm a paleoecologist, a paleoanthropologist, so studying human evolution, studying the evolutionary context, the ecological context of our ancestors. And jobs available, but not 1,000 jobs available. You know, it's a very specific thing that I do. And so there weren't, all the departments in the world that were available needing someone who does what I do. And just by chance, here at Virginia Commonwealth University, in the same city that I grew up in, there was an opportunity. And so I took that opportunity, and I am here now. And this is now my 15th year here. Been very happy here at VCU. And throughout the years, as I kind of got my own research going and a little more started here, Dr. Kay Reed and I, of course, are always collaborating, and we're always writing together, and we're always working together. And it just made sense for me to really kind of come back into the fold, and I got re-involved in the project. And so since about 2018, I've been going again every year, and now I co-direct it with her, this project. And we are very excited about the fact that after years and years of looking and making sure we really understood the site, now we do, and we are finding fossils in the age range that we are trying to find them, and we are making big discoveries that really can contribute to the overall story of our evolutionary past.
The new findings at Ledi-Geraru, Ethiopia, challenge the long-held perception of our early ancestors upright walking Australopithecus, slowly but surely evolving into the genus Homo and then into our species, Homo sapiens. Amy, can you give us an overview of this apparently linear progression of ape to human and why that perception is changing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting, even still today, if you Google human evolution and look for an image, likely what you are going to find is this image of what we call the march of progress, this linear progression from kind of a ape-like quadrupedal ancestor who's kind of hunched over, that step by step gets a little bit taller, a little bit taller, a little bit taller, until there is this bipedal human, modern human, at the end of this progression. We call this the march of progress because it's this idea that there was just one linear pathway that went from a very ape-like or chimp-like ancestor evolving into modern humans today. Still today, this is this image that really pops out and is this kind of easy, very simple way to kind of envision what evolutionary history of our ancestors was like. But what we know now is that that march of progress, or that linear kind of one lineage progression, doesn't reflect our evolutionary history really at all. That in fact, when we think about the evolution of our ancestors, it's much more of either a bushy tree, or more recently people have used a braided stream as an analogy, that there are multiple lineages that are evolving and experimenting, and that they don't necessarily become fully separate species at any point in time, but that they can then, as populations kind of get reintegrated into each other, such that there are potentially multiple species, multiple lineages around at the same time, all experimenting on the landscape at the same time. And so for a long time, there was this idea that there's a genus Australopithecus, and most famously known for Lucy. So Lucy was discovered in Hadar in Ethiopia, very near our site 50 years ago. And at the time, she was the most complete skeleton of our ancestors. There's lots of other Australopithecus species that have been discovered across Africa, both earlier and later. And there was this idea that Australopithecus as a genus was alive for a long time and then kind of evolved slowly or step by step into our genus, the genus Homo. And so for Ledi-Geraru, what we have that's pretty special there is a time period that can help us answer questions about Australopithecus and the end of the Australopithecus time period in Eastern Africa, and then the genus Homo, our genus, and the beginning of the genus Homo in Eastern Africa. Because what Ledi-Geraru has is this time period between about 3 and 2 million years ago. And that's pretty rare on the African continent. And so anything that we find during that time period adds a lot of information because we just don't have many data points there during that time period. And so to know that Lucy's kind, or Australopithecus in general, Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, her species, seems to disappear from the fossil record around 3 million years ago. And then Homo, our lineage, arises in the fossil record shortly after that. And so what is the link there? Is there a link there? Is it sort of this step-by-step trajectory from one into the other? And so for Ledi, what we find is that Australopithecus, not Lucy's Australopithecus, but a different Australopithecus, and Homo actually overlap, potentially in space and time, at Ledi-Geraru between about 3 and 2.5 million years ago. So this is more information showing us that this is not just one linear step-by-step progression, that there are multiple lineages, again, experimenting on the landscape. How are they going to adapt to maybe seasonality or climates that are getting drier over time? How are these lineages taking advantage of resources on the landscape? Are they eating meat? Are they not eating meat? Are they eating something else? How complex was it really during this time period? And what we are finding is that, again, that kind of step-by-step linear progression just doesn't capture the really amazing complexity and period of adaptive radiation, meaning that all of these species are adapting rapidly, potentially, to changing climates, changing habitats, but they're doing it at the same time. So are they dividing up these resources? Are they actually interacting on the landscape? So it's really much more complicated, this idea of this bushy tree or this braided stream. And what's amazing is that basically any project that is working in this rough time period is finding similar results, that things are much more complex than we originally thought. And there's not just one species at a time that we're trying to understand. It's multiple species at a time that we're trying to understand, and how they're sharing resources in the landscape, as well as evolving potentially into us or going extinct, and then being able to answer questions about why.
The Ledi-Geraru research project began in 2002, led by Professor Kay Reed of Arizona State University, to search for fossil clues that would help us explain why earlier Australopiths apparently vanished, leading to the appearance of genus Homo. So, can you take us from those early days right up to the first of the team's significant discoveries?
Yeah, so this is a fun story, and it's a good story, really illustrating the time it takes and the amount of detailed information that's needed in order to really be able to tell these stories. And so when Kay Reed and Ramon Arrowsmith and Charlie Lockwood started this project in 2002, they knew that this was an area where we might be able to find some amazing fossils because the entire area, this Afar triangle, this region, sits at the very north part of the East African Rift Valley system. And so what that means is there's tectonic plates under the ground that are actively pulling apart today. And that means that there are earthquakes today, and there are some volcanoes that erupt today, actively pulling apart today, and actually exposing this Rift Valley such that if you go down into the Rift Valley, you're essentially going back in time. So walking down into the valley, you find fossils that are exposed, and the deeper you go in the valley, the farther back in time you go. And so all of the sites in the Afar region are there because of this active Rift Valley system. And the places like Hadar and Moronzo Mile and Mile Logia and Dakika, these other famous and well-known sites, they're there for the same reason, because these fossils are being exposed as the tectonic plates move apart. Now, Kay had been really involved in the Hadar research project, which mostly has time periods that are a little bit older. So that's where Lucy was found. That's where lots of Australopithecus afarensis have been found. There are some younger bits as well, so there are some early Homo there too. But Kay was really interested. She said, I want to catch the end of that. I want to catch the end of Lucy and the beginning of Homo. I think that there are places in the Afar region that have that particular time period exposed. So again, between about 3 and 2 million, 3 and 2.5 million, where can I find those areas? And so the process of working a new site in Ethiopia, in the Afar region, does include finding an area that's not already part of someone else's permit, also applying for that permit from the Ethiopian Heritage Authority, which is the museum in Addis Ababa, also working with the local Afar regional state to make sure that you have all of the correct permissions from the various governmental agencies. And then you start looking. And so one of the earliest things they did was bring on Ramon Arrowsmith, who's a geologist, because you can look and look and look and you can find fossils, but if you don't know how old they are, you can't really fit them into the story of the region and understand how these species and how these fossils relate to each other and are evolving into each other. And part of that, again, is the knowing how old things are, is being able to get dates on the layers of dirt, the strata, the fossils that you are finding. And so what our geologists do, so Chris Campazano and Ramon Arrowsmith and Aaron DiMaggio and others, one of their biggest roles, they have lots of huge roles because we couldn't do any of this without them, but some of their biggest roles is to really place us in time. And in order to do that, they do these dating techniques. They get absolute dates on layers of ash. And so, as I said earlier, because the East African Rift Valley is active, it's actively moving, the tectonic plates are actively opening up. That means the whole Earth is kind of grinding against each other in certain areas. And so you get, again, those earthquakes. And earlier this year, there were earthquake swarms. And unfortunately, sometimes that means people are affected. But that also means that just the Earth itself is moving. And that also there's potential for other types of active tectonics like volcanic activity. And so there have been really active volcanoes in this region for millions and millions of years. Today, they're not as active in the sense that there hasn't been a big eruption with like a big ash spew in a while. And by a while, I mean a long, long time. But in our deep past, there absolutely were big volcanic events. And these big volcanic events would shoot ash into the air, and these layers of ash would spread for miles and miles and miles across the ground. And what they look like today are these white layers in the Earth's strata. And so when you look at a lot of these pictures that we share of Hadar and Ledi-Geraru, you can see those white layers. And those are past volcanic eruptions. That's the ash that's been laid down from past volcanic eruptions. And because of the way unstable and stable isotopes work and how unstable isotopes always want to become stable, what geologists can do is they can study the ratio of certain isotopes to each other. And in this case, it's often potassium argon or argon to another type of argon in these layers of ash and see how long this ash has been on the Earth's surface. And so for the first many years of working at Ledi-Geraru, one of the main goals was, first, let's find these layers of ash, and then let's date these layers of ash. And so that takes a long time, finding the layers of ash, because you do see pictures where they stick right out and it's bright white and it's really easy to see. But sometimes you have to dig for them to find them. So finding them and then collecting samples and then getting those samples dated. And so finally, we were able to do that. After many years of those samples and analysis, we understood where we were in time on the landscape. And then when we had a map of where those ash layers were, we could then see where we should be in space. If we want to know what the fossils between 2.5 and 2.78 look like, then let's find those two ash layers and look for fossils that were deposited in between those two ash layers, because we know they were deposited after 2.78 million years ago, but before 2.5. And so we know exactly how old they are. We weren't able to do that for many years because we didn't know the ages of those ash layers. And so once we finally did know those and we knew where those ash layers were, we could really pinpoint where we wanted to look. For many years, we walked a lot. We walked a lot of miles. We didn't find the ash layers. We didn't find the fossils. A lot of walking, a lot of looking, not a lot of return, except that it was all part of this process. And so, again, after years and years of looking and finally kind of triangulating ourselves on the landscape, where do we need to be looking? That's when we really kind of got it right. And with the help of the geologists and then the paleoanthropologists who knew kind of what we were looking for. And that did lead to the first big discovery at Ledi-Geraru, which was that hominin, it's a hemimandible, it's half of a mandible, called LD350. That was about 2.78 million years old. So we knew that because of that ash layer that had been dated, and we wouldn't have known that without that date. And it was identified based on the size and shape of the teeth as the earliest member of our genus, the genus Homo. And so it was quite a bit earlier than we expected to find that. It's the earliest member of our genus that's been identified in Africa, and really kind of solidified the importance and the vision that Kay had that this is a place that we need to look, and that something special was happening during this time period and that we can find it here at Ledi-Geraru. So this mandible, LD350, was a real game changer in a lot of ways because it showed several things. Number one, it showed that our genus, the genus Homo, is on the landscape earlier than anybody had expected. Now, we haven't given it a species name yet because we want to be a little bit conservative about kind of building our hypotheses, that we need to find a little bit more of this particular taxon, and we'd like to find both more teeth, but also more of the skeleton, maybe a little bit more of its skull, maybe something in its postcrania, so that we know we have a better kind of snapshot of this earliest member of our genus. And so the fact that it's on the landscape that early was one unexpected and really exciting. And also that it's found right there in Ledi-Geraru in the lower Awash Valley. So some of the earliest Homo that we've found, there's a story about early Homo across Eastern Africa, across Tanzania and Kubifora and places like that. There's early Homo down in Southern Africa as well. The real new thing about LD350 was that it is the earliest member of our genus, the genus Homo, at about 2.78 million years ago, which is earlier than we have it anywhere else in Africa, early Homo anywhere else in Africa, and adds kind of this extended time period to the evolution of our genus. And so it pushes it back closer to when Australopithecus afarensis was on the landscape. It gives us information about what the earliest member of our genus looked like. They did still look a lot like Australopithecus. They were still pretty small, yet there were these very distinctive characteristics, like the sizes and the shapes of the teeth, that very clearly tell us that it is a member of the genus Homo. So we want to find more, of course, so that we can know even more about what this early member of our genus looks like, both in terms of teeth, in terms of variation within the species, but also maybe if we could find some skull, if we could find something else about the skeleton that gives us a bigger snapshot, not just of what its teeth look like, but how was it adapting to the landscape. So not only does the fossil itself give us information, but also the context of that fossil, that the earliest member of our genus does seem to maybe be living in a time where we're seeing a little bit more seasonality, where the climate is getting a little bit drier. And so that brought out some hypotheses at the time of maybe that's an important part of the adaptation of early Homo, that maybe Australopithecus is on the landscape and they're not quite handling the climatic change or the seasonality quite as much, but maybe Homo can. And so when we first discovered this particular mandible and published it, that was a really big part of the hypothesis that this seasonality and climatic change is important to the evolution of our genus, which turns out to change a little bit when we find a couple more things a little bit later on.
The mandible wasn't the only important find from the Ledi-Geraru area. More hominin specimens were unearthed in 2018. But as is so often the case with the search for fossils, the road wasn't exactly a smooth one, was it?
No, it really wasn't. And what's important about kind of paleoanthropological work and any kind of work that you're doing anywhere really on the ground is that you have to remember that it's not just coming in with scientists and conducting some analyses or collecting some data and being able to do that whenever you really want to, that there are a team of people on the ground who are a critical part of the research and that their lives are impacted by everything that's going on. And so what I mean by that is when we were on the ground, for instance, in 2020, for the field season that was going from January to February, I think it maybe even went into March, you may recall that at that time in 2020, COVID started, impacting the entire world. And so our team was still in the field when it became very clear that we needed to leave earlier than we had planned, and we needed to get out of there, both for the safety of our team on the ground in Ethiopia, but also for the safety of the scientists who had come to work. And so we had to shut that season down quickly without really knowing when we were going to be able to come back. And at the time, I think everybody thought that COVID was just going to be this short little blip and wasn't going to last very long. And we were lucky, actually, that a lot of our team members on the ground, and so by team members on the ground, I mean the Afar people who live there and we hire, and they become integral parts of our team because they are the main fossil finders. And also the rest of our camp crew and our kitchen crew, mostly they live in Addis Ababa, but they travel with us out into the field. They've been with us for decades. So all of these people have been with us for decades. And so when we think about the safety of our site and the safety of our crew, we're thinking about everybody. And COVID became something that we were very concerned with everybody involved. And ultimately, we were lucky that COVID had a little less of an impact on the Ethiopian population than it could have. So most of our team came out of COVID okay, but unfortunately in Ethiopia at about that same time, long-term political conflict turned into more than just political conflict. And there were several years worth of essentially civil war in Ethiopia that did impact our team members directly. And so we did lose members of our team through conflict, through armed conflict that had to do with the Ethiopian civil war. And so during that period, we simply could not go back. We couldn't be there on the ground to do any research. We had to think about how to support our team members who were there, who were being impacted by the violence. And also COVID for a long time, prevented people from traveling internationally as well. And so when we think about these timelines for science, yes, it takes us a long time to find the ash layers and to date them. It also takes us a long time to analyze, but also life is happening to every single team member. And sometimes that means there are just delays, that it's much more important that we think about the safety of everyone than that we really just need to get there to describe some teeth. And so there was kind of a liminal time there where we weren't able to go. We didn't know how long it was going to be before we were able to go. And in 2024, things had cleared up enough, and there was a truce that had been called, and it seemed like we were going to be able to go back. And we were lucky that other teams had been researching in the area. So 2024, we were able to go back and pick up where we had left off. We were very sad that we had lost 3 of our Afar team members in that time period. And so going back in 2024 again was not the same. That these team members like Omar Abdullah, who is a co-author on our paper, as well as Mohammed Hamadeen, that they had been with us for decades and that they were no longer there.
Well, finding the fossils is just one of the hurdles of this project. Amy, what needed to happen before you and the team were able to publish your findings earlier this year?
This is a great question, because there's a surprising amount that has to happen in the background. And so we had actually found many of the teeth that we describe in this paper before we had to kind of take that hiatus for COVID and the political unrest. So we knew that they were there, and we had started our preliminary analysis, which basically means everything has to be cleaned, everything has to be cataloged. When we find fossils on the ground, we're very careful about mapping where they come from, so we know exactly where in time and space they're located, and they're part of this huge catalog that we have, that we put all kinds of information in. And so all of that, what I think of as curatorial or museum work, has to be done, which takes some time. And then there is the analysis. And for papers like this and for teeth like this, it's mostly comparative. So Brian Vilmore and Lucas Delazine are our hominin tooth guys. They know every single detail about every single hominin tooth that's been found at our site, and basically any site in the Eastern African region and even beyond that. So analysis is comparative. Basically, do the teeth that we have, does their variation fit within variation of another species that's already known? So do they look enough like another species to be that species? And that means really a lot of time-consuming pictures, measurements, descriptions of the bumps and the crannies and the valleys on teeth and how they compare to other species that are already known. So that takes an extended period of time. And then the peer review itself, so you write up your paper and you submit it to a journal. And for a journal like Nature, which was where our paper came out, the vast majority of the time papers are what are called desk rejected. So the editor sees it and decides within usually 24 to 48 hours that it's not even going to go out for peer review for that particular journal. They'll say, this is great, but this is not for us. Go find a different journal. And so that first phase, we were like, is it going to get reviewed? And it did. And then overall, we had 2 or 3 series of revise and resubmits. And so basically the paper was sent out to 4 reviewers, and they came back with all of these comments and said, this is interesting and we're interested, but these are the ways that you can improve this paper. So it took almost a year and a half for us to go completely through peer review with 4 different reviewers who were experts in the field, who are experts in the field, who spent considerable time making this paper better, really. And finally, we were able to get to the point where now it's time that the paper has gone through peer review, which means experts in our field have agreed that what we are saying is supported by data, and then it can be published. And so this is the exciting time where it's out, and other scientists can give us their opinions and talk to us about it and say whether they agree or not with what we're saying. And so the teeth that we have found, they give us lots of information about this critical time period. One is that Homo is where we think it is in space and time. And so we found a few more teeth that confirm that the earliest member of our genus Homo is in Ledi-Geraru at 2.78 million years ago. And that's exciting just as this other data point. Yes, this confirms that Homo is here. We don't just have LD350, the mandible, we now have other teeth as well. But the thing that was really unexpected for us were the teeth from LD760, which is a place that I'll say with love, we call it Turtle Flats, because there is a fossil turtle right out in the middle of it, and it's a flat area. We just one day, I think it was David Feary, one of our geologists, who one day just called it Turtle Flat, and then that stuck. And so we've referred to it as that. The unexpected thing was that at 2.63 million, the teeth that we found there, LD760, 9 teeth from one individual, aren't Homo, actually. They are a new Australopithecus. So they look like Australopithecus teeth, which means the shapes and sizes of the teeth, as well as how the bumps on the teeth, the cusps of the teeth, how they're configured, they look more like Australopithecus than Homo. They don't look like Homo teeth. And you open your mouth, this is not what those teeth look like. But they also don't look like Australopithecus afarensis, so they're not afarensis teeth. And the only other Australopithecus that's around in Eastern Africa during this time period at 2.6 is Australopithecus garhi, which is further south in the middle Awash, and they are not Australopithecus garhi. So what that means is that there's something new. They're a new Australopithecus. So that's cool. That's exciting. But on top of that, they also overlap in space and time with that earlier Homo. So this is the first time in Eastern Africa, in the Awash Valley, that we see an overlap of one genus Australopithecus and one genus Homo in the same space and time in this narrow window. Does that mean that they are actually interacting? We don't know for sure yet, but we do know that there's a potential that they're figuring out how to share resources on the landscape, that this phase of experimentation, both in Australopithecus and Homo, is happening at the same time. And that there is any hypothesis we made about early Homo in the environment, and so maybe early Homo is able to handle increased seasonality or aridity, that Australopithecus is actually there too. And so that means we now need to be a little bit more complex about these hypotheses that we're building for the environmental context in the paleoecology, and that everything we find from this time period has the potential to add significantly to how we are understanding what's going on between about 3 and 2.5 million years ago, both in terms of our ancestors evolving and in terms of the paleoecology.
Well, these are incredible findings, and I guess the question that this leaves us with is, how did these fossils change how we view human origins?
Well, what's so cool about paleoanthropology and the study of our origins is that every discovery that's made and every new kind of fossil that's described really does add a new puzzle to the overall, or add a new piece to the overall puzzle. So this overall picture of what our evolutionary history looked like. And so now at Ledi-Geraru, we've twice identified a new hominin and not given them a species name. And part of that is because we want to make sure that we are being a little bit conservative with our hypotheses, in the sense of we know what this isn't. So this new Australopithecus, for instance, we know it's not Lucy. We know it's not afarensis. We know it's not Australopithecus garhi. We know it's not any Australopithecus species that's been described so far. We're not quite ready to fully say 100% what it is, because we'd like to have a little bit more of it. We'd like to have maybe more of its skull, more of its teeth, so that we have a better kind of mugshot of what this species looks like, this overall picture of what the species, so that we can say more confidently what it is. We did the same thing with LD350 when we said it's a new species of Homo, it's the earliest Homo. But again, we could tell what it wasn't, but we want a little more information before we say with full confidence what it is. And by doing that, we set up this scenario that other scientists are more than welcome. They're invited to come in and say, well, we disagree with you for these reasons, or we agree with you for these reasons, and to bring about a really robust scientific conversation about what it means to see this kind of variation at this time period. And so I think we've known for a while that linear march of progression is not supported by the fossil record, that it's much more, again, this bushy tree or a braided stream, as a lot of our colleagues have been saying more recently. But the more actual data points that we can put on the braided stream, the more really data-driven conversations we can have about what that means. So what is our expectation for variation at this time period? How many more species might we find? Do we think there will be many more? Do we think this is it? And then how do we map that onto environmental change to really tell the story about what it means to be human and what it ultimately means to be a part of our lineage during this period of experimentation? And so really, we're excited to add these new taxa to the bushy family tree, but what it does is set up the field for continued exploration and continued description of the evolution of our ancestors, and we think that's the most important part of all.
Well, this has been such a fascinating interview, and I'm very grateful that you've been able to take the time to come on to the show today. So, what's next for you, Amy? What upcoming projects can you tell us about?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed it. And I am happy to be here and talk about our science. And really what we have coming up next is a little bit more of, I'm going to say more of the same, but I don't really mean it that way. We were very pleased to find that we have received our continued NSF funding for the National Science Foundation in the US as one of the federal funding agencies that we get some grant funding from to do research. And we were worried, given the overall kind of picture around federal funding for science right now in the US, we were worried that we weren't going to get our full grant, but we just found out that we will. And so we're going to go back this coming spring, I say spring, but January, February of 2026. And there are some sites where we have, full disclosure, found some more interesting things from this time period. And so we are going to do some more exploration in that area to see what else we can find and describe in maybe another paper coming up soon. But at the same time, one of the big goals of the Ledi-Geraru research project relates to what we talked about a little bit earlier when we mentioned COVID and the political unrest, is that the Afar community that we work with, they are such an important part of our team. And the Afar don't necessarily get a lot of opportunities to do the training that's needed for them to really be fully integrated into the project as leaders, essentially. And so Ledi-Geraru, our project, and some of the other projects in the area have been working with the university in Samara, the geology department and the anthropology department, as well as the Afar Regional State. We want to develop some training for undergraduate students. And we're also working with Arizona State University to develop a master's program for students to get a master's in paleoanthropology, to get some of the education that they need so that they can then become leaders in this area and have sites and make these discoveries and be supported basically by other scientists rather than just being the team members that we kind of bring onto our own team. So that's a really important part of what we're doing right now, this community engagement part. And I'm really proud of that work, as well as the fact that we're getting our research translated into Afar and Amharic so that it's more accessible, because really the work that we do could not be done without the Afar people. And so that's something that we're working on a little bit more now to keep them, or to get them actually more involved from the ground up. And of course, we are always giving talks at science museums, and I've had a lot of fun doing all of those things. And continuing to talk about the importance of our science. But I will say that we likely have a couple more interesting things coming out in the years to come. We just might have to be a little bit patient since it takes quite a bit of time for us to get these things out. So yeah.
Dr. Amy Rector, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I just want to once more say I appreciate all the time that you take to put these events together, to put these podcasts together, and how excited I am to be invited to do it, because for me, it's never too late to get excited about science. Paleoanthropology and human evolution, I think, is interesting and relevant for everyone. And the fact that you make these opportunities for people to get involved and to hear more about what's going on, I think is so critical. So thank you so much. And I encourage everyone to read a little bit more and get involved a little bit more, and really get excited about science and the history of our own species and our humanity.